My name is Natalie Chen, and until a few weeks ago, my life felt normal. I'm 34 years old, a fourth-grade teacher, and married to David, who's made a name for himself managing money at some fancy hedge fund downtown. We lived in a cozy house in the suburbs, had friends over for barbecues, and argued about whose turn it was to walk the dog, all the regular stuff. I loved my job. The kids kept me on my toes, and there's nothing like seeing that aha moment when they finally understand a tough concept. David, well, he loved his job too. Maybe a little too much. He was always working late, glued to his phone, talking about deals and investors in hushed tones. I tried to be supportive, understanding the pressure he was under. But lately, something felt off. Little things, almost unnoticeable, but enough to make a knot form in my stomach. It started with the little things. David used to call me from the office on his way home, just to chat about my day or ask if I needed anything from the store. Those calls stopped. He'd come home later and later, claiming important meetings or urgent deals. I'd make dinner, but he'd barely touch it, saying he'd already eaten. Then there was the phone. Always glued to it. He'd jump if I even got close. He changed his password, which he'd never done before. At night, he'd lie next to me in bed, but he was miles away, lost in some digital world I wasn't allowed to enter. I tried to talk to him about it, but he'd brush it off, saying I was being paranoid or that work was just really stressful. But my gut told me something else was going on. Something he wasn't telling me. The truth came out on a Tuesday. David had left his phone on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower, and I was making coffee. It buzzed, lighting up the screen. Normally, I wouldn't look. But the name that flashed across the screen, Jessica, work, felt like a punch to the gut. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I told myself I was just checking the time. But my fingers betrayed me, swiping the notification open. The message was short, but it was enough. Can't wait for tonight, winky face. Below it, a string of messages I couldn't unsee. Explicit, intimate, and undeniably meant for my husband. My world tilted on its axis. The coffee pot rattled in my hand. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt thick and suffocating. I don't think I moved for a solid 5 minutes. Just stood there, phone clutched in my hand, staring blankly at the kitchen cabinets. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. How could he? How could he do this to me? To us? Tears streamed down my face, blurring the already distorted reality around me. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to confront him right then and there. But I couldn't. I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. It felt like everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, was a lie. The foundation I'd built my world on had crumbled beneath my feet. I sank to the floor, the cold tile a stark contrast to the burning rage inside me. The initial wave of shock began to recede, replaced by a burning anger. I wanted revenge. I wanted him to feel the same gut-wrenching pain I was feeling. But how? Confronting him seemed too easy, too expected. I needed something more. Something that would truly shake him to his core. My mind raced, exploring different scenarios. Should I tell his parents? Call Jessica's boyfriend if she had one? Expose him on social media? No. Those felt too petty. Then, it hit me. His job. His precious, all-consuming job. That was his weakness. An affair like this could ruin him, especially with the strict ethical standards of the financial world. The seed of an idea began to sprout, a dangerous, tempting plan forming in my mind. The plan started to solidify. I would expose the affair, but not in a messy, emotional outburst. I would be strategic, calculated. I needed to make sure David felt the full weight of his actions. His career, his reputation, those were the things he valued most. So, I would target them directly. I decided to send the messages to his firm's HR department. Anonymously, of course. I knew they had a strict policy against relationships between superiors and subordinates. Especially something as blatant as this. And I knew that the firm's biggest annual investor meeting was just around the corner. Perfect timing. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of fear and exhilaration. This was going to be risky, but I was past the point of caring about the consequences. I was doing this. The next few days were a blur of carefully calculated actions. While David was at work, I secretly accessed his phone again. I needed to ensure I had all the evidence. I meticulously screenshot every incriminating text message, every suggestive photo. I even managed to find emails between them, filled with thinly veiled innuendo and plans for secret rendezvous. I created a separate folder on my computer, carefully organizing the evidence. I also researched the firm's HR policies, confirming my suspicions about their stance on workplace relationships. The more I learned, the more confident I became in my plan. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice. About holding him accountable for his actions. I felt a strange sense of purpose, a cold, steely resolve settling within me. Anonymity was paramount. I couldn't risk David finding out it was me. That would ruin everything. I created a new email address using a secure, encrypted service. I used a fake name and a generic profile picture. I even used a VPN to mask my IP address, making it virtually impossible to trace the email back to my home network. I tested the email address, sending a harmless message to a friend to make sure it worked. Then, I practiced writing the email to HR, carefully wording it to sound objective and professional. I included a brief explanation of the situation and attached the folder containing all the evidence. I wanted to be thorough, leaving no room for doubt or dismissal. This had to be airtight. The day arrived. The day I would set my plan in motion. I waited until David was at work and the house was quiet. I took a deep breath, opened the email, and reread it one last time. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. There was no turning back. With trembling fingers, I clicked the send button. The email disappeared into the digital void, carrying with it the potential to destroy David's career and shatter our marriage. I closed my laptop, a wave of nausea washing over me. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins suddenly dissipated, leaving me feeling empty and strangely vulnerable. What had I just done? The timing of the email was crucial. The firm's annual investor meeting was less than a week away. It was a high-stakes event, where David and his colleagues would be presenting their strategies and performance to potential investors. Millions of dollars were on the line. I knew that if the HR department received the email now, it would create maximum disruption. They would be forced to investigate, potentially jeopardizing David's participation in the meeting and casting a shadow over the entire event. The timing wasn't just about revenge, it was about maximizing the impact. It was about ensuring that David's actions had real, tangible consequences. It was a calculated risk, but I believed it was worth it. The days that followed were agonizing. I became a master of disguise, pretending everything was normal while secretly watching David like a hawk. I scrutinized his every move, his every phone call, his every interaction. Was he acting differently? Was he more stressed than usual? Did he seem to be avoiding me? He seemed preoccupied, but then again, he always was. He worked even longer hours, claiming the investor meeting required extra preparation. I tried to casually bring up work-related topics, fishing for information, but he remained tight-lipped. The silence was deafening. I was living a double life, a spy in my own home, waiting for the bomb to explode. The tension was almost unbearable. Then, the whispers started. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard snippets of conversations about David's firm. Something about HR investigations. Rumors of an affair. Could impact the investor meeting. I pretended not to hear, forcing a smile and engaging in polite small talk. But inside, my heart was racing. My plan was working. The news was spreading. I tried to glean more information, subtly steering the conversation, but people were guarded, hesitant to share details. It was like piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces. Still, it was enough to confirm that my email had landed exactly where I intended. And the fallout was beginning. David became a powder keg. He was constantly snapping at me, complaining about work, and generally making life miserable. He paced around the house, muttering about investors and deadlines. He barely slept, and when he did, he tossed and turned, plagued by nightmares. I tried to feign sympathy, asking if everything was all right, but he just brushed me off, saying it was just the pressure of the upcoming meeting. He seemed completely oblivious to the real reason for his stress. It was almost comical, watching him unravel, completely unaware that I was the one pulling the strings. A part of me felt a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Jessica's text messages. He deserved this. I resisted the urge to confront David directly. I wanted to see how far the situation would escalate, to witness the full extent of the damage. I knew that once I revealed my hand, the game would change. He would become defensive, manipulative, and I wanted to savor this moment of control. Besides, I wasn't sure what I wanted. Did I want to save our marriage? Or destroy it completely? The answer shifted with the wind, depending on my mood. So, I waited. I played the role of the supportive wife, offering him tea and a listening ear, all while secretly plotting his downfall. It was a twisted game, but I was determined to see it through. The news came indirectly, as most things did these days. A friend, whose husband worked in the same industry, mentioned in passing that David's assistant, Jessica, had left the firm. She didn't elaborate, but the implication was clear. She'd been fired, or perhaps forced to resign. A wave of satisfaction washed over me. One less loose end. One more consequence for David's actions. I wondered if he felt any guilt, any remorse for what he'd done to her. Or was he simply relieved to have the problem taken care of? I knew I should feel some sympathy for Jessica, but all I felt was a cold, hard sense of justice. She was collateral damage, but David was the real target. The investor meeting came and went. David was a zombie for days beforehand, barely speaking and radiating stress. Afterwards, he was strangely subdued. He didn't celebrate any successes, nor did he lament any failures. He simply existed. I gleaned hints from various sources that the meeting hadn't gone as planned. One friend mentioned that some investors were uncomfortable with the recent personnel changes. Another hinted that David's team had underperformed compared to expectations. Nothing concrete, but enough to suggest that the affair had cast a long shadow over the firm's reputation and investor confidence. The plan had worked. Perhaps too well. The time had come. I couldn't delay it any longer. I waited until David was home from work, slumped on the couch, staring blankly at the television. I turned it off. He looked at me, confused. "We need to talk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Not now, Natalie. I'm exhausted." "Now," I insisted, pulling out my laptop. I opened the folder containing the screenshots of his text messages with Jessica. I turned the screen so he could see them. His face drained of color. "I know about the affair, David. And I know what you did." The game was over. The truth was out. His initial reaction was exactly as I expected. Denial. "Those aren't mine," he sputtered, his voice rising in panic. "Someone must have hacked my phone." Then came the anger. "How dare you snoop through my personal belongings? You have no right." He tried to gaslight me, telling me I was imagining things, that I was being insecure and irrational. He twisted the narrative, making himself the victim. But I was prepared. I stood my ground, refusing to be manipulated. I knew the truth, and I wouldn't let him rewrite the story. His lies only fueled my anger, solidifying my resolve. I was done playing his game. "It's not a hack, David. It's the truth," I said, my voice calm and steady despite the storm raging inside me. I pointed to the dates on the messages, the frequency of the calls, the undeniable evidence of his betrayal. Then, I told him about the email. I explained how I had discovered the affair, how I had gathered the evidence, and how I had anonymously sent it to his HR department. I told him why I had done it, to make him face the consequences of his actions, to hold him accountable for his lies and his deceit. I wanted him to understand the pain he had inflicted on me. I wanted him to see the damage he had caused. I wanted him to know that I wasn't a victim anymore. I was in control. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, pregnant with unspoken words and shattered trust. David stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock, anger, and a flicker of something that might have been regret. Our marriage, once a source of comfort and stability, now hung precariously in the balance, teetering on the edge of oblivion. We spent the rest of the night in separate rooms, the walls of our home suddenly feeling like prison bars. The air was thick with resentment and the weight of our unspoken accusations. The future stretched before us, uncertain and daunting. I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The next day, I called my best friend, Sarah. I needed to talk to someone, to unload the burden of the past few weeks. I told her everything, the affair, the email, the confrontation. She listened without judgment, offering words of support and understanding. She suggested I see a therapist, someone who could help me process my emotions and navigate this difficult situation. I hesitated at first, but then I realized she was right. I couldn't do this alone. I needed professional guidance to help me make sense of the chaos and figure out what I wanted for my future. I also considered talking to my parents, but I wasn't ready to share this with them just yet. The shame and embarrassment were still too raw. The next morning, David tried to apologize. It was a hesitant, awkward apology, filled with excuses and justifications. He said he was sorry for hurting me, for betraying my trust. He claimed it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, and that it would never happen again. He begged me to forgive him, to give him another chance. He promised to go to therapy, to work on our marriage. But his words felt hollow, insincere. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was only apologizing because he had been caught, because his actions had backfired. Was he truly remorseful, or was he just trying to salvage his career and his reputation? I honestly couldn't tell. And that was the problem. I spent the next few days in a state of deep reflection. I replayed the events of the past few weeks in my mind, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I questioned my own actions, wondering if I had gone too far. Had my desire for revenge blinded me to the potential consequences? Had I destroyed our marriage beyond repair? I also thought about my future. What did I want? Did I want to stay with David and try to rebuild our relationship, or did I want to walk away and start over? The answers weren't clear. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. I knew I needed to make a decision, but I wasn't sure what that decision should be. I needed time, space, and a lot of soul-searching. After weeks of agonizing deliberation, I finally made a decision. It wasn't an easy one, but it was the right one for me. I realized that the trust in our marriage had been irrevocably broken. Even if David was truly remorseful, I couldn't forgive him. The pain of his betrayal was too deep, the scars too permanent. I decided to leave. I told David that I wanted a divorce. He was devastated, pleading with me to reconsider. But my mind was made up. I needed to move on, to create a new life for myself, free from the shadow of his infidelity. I knew it would be difficult, but I was ready to face the future on my own terms. My actions had far-reaching consequences. For David, the affair had damaged his reputation at work and likely hindered his career prospects. He lost his assistant, his marriage, and possibly the respect of some of his colleagues. He was left to grapple with the fallout of his choices, facing the very public humiliation he had tried so hard to avoid. For me, the consequences were more nuanced. I gained a sense of empowerment and control, standing up for myself and refusing to be a victim. However, I also carried the weight of my actions, the guilt of potentially harming innocent people, and the pain of a broken marriage. I was free, but I was also scarred. Despite the scars, I was determined to build a new life for myself. I focused on my teaching, finding solace in the energy and innocence of my students. I reconnected with old friends, nurturing the relationships that had been neglected during my marriage. I started taking yoga classes, finding peace and strength in the physical challenges. I was still healing, still processing the trauma of the past few months. But I was also growing, evolving, and discovering a newfound sense of self-reliance. The future was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I was Natalie Chen, and I was ready to face whatever came my way, on my own terms. It was a new beginning,